Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the event Nuts of Ukraine, Exchange Experience with Georgia. Today's event is organized as a support to the Ukrainian nuts sector in a wartime, and its main task is sharing experience of Georgian nuts growers with Ukrainian colleagues. We are delighted to welcome today Ukrainians, representatives of the nuts sector, who despite all difficulties and absence of direct connection with air flights to the country, have managed to come and participate today in person. The conference is organized by the East Fruit Project with support of EBRD and FAO. Our event today is live streamed at East Fruit YouTube channel, and recording will be published later. Presentations will be available at East Fruit web page. Please mute your phones and enjoy professional discussions. And now I would like to invite to the stage First Deputy Minister of Environmental Protection and Agriculture of Georgia, Mr. George Khanishvili. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katerina. Welcome, my friends. I welcome organizers of our today's meeting. I would like to welcome this exhibition at Expo Georgia in general, because we had the opening of this exhibition yesterday and very important messages were sounded here from the ambassadors of the countries participating in this exhibition, as well as from the ministry, from our ministry, and also from the management of Expo Georgia. Actually, it's a 20th exhibition, and if not the COVID situation, we would have been up to 22nd exhibition already. Today we have a very important day in Georgia, not only because that we will be sharing experience with our Ukrainian colleagues, and that also we can see very interesting offers for the farmers at this exhibition. But also today it's has also political importance, because our Ukrainian friends from the country that experiences aggression from Russia and from the country that is being destroyed, and so the whole world recognizes that this aggression should have been stopped and Ukraine should be restored in its boundaries. But unfortunately we don't see the end to this aggression so far, but I'm sure that the world and our Ukrainian friends will do everything to restore independence of Ukraine and to restore its territorial integrity. This situation is very well known for us, because I'm representing generation which remembers very well all the aggression facts of Georgia. We remember what we had in Abkhazia, in Ossetia, and before Bucha we had the Gagra here. And I always say that tragedy of Bucha, so actually there were the Russians committed such an atrocity there. But also in Gagra we had, when they were playing football with the heads of Georgian soldiers. And of course war is disaster, but human being is very strong, because it still continues building despite of everything. And today here, when we see this disaster, on the other hand, we are speaking about sharing experiences of our Ukrainian friends, and that's extremely important. That's extremely important because Ukraine, the country that is actually agricultural country, and of course we cannot compare their agriculture scale with our agriculture, but so this traditions that they have, this the agronomical culture, the harvesting, the storage of this harvest, sales, we can learn a lot from our Ukrainian friends. We can learn because Ukraine, unlike Georgia, unlike the situation we had in 1990s, Yes, we have seen very different situation in 1990s after collapse of the Soviet Union. We collapsed here in Georgia too, but in Ukraine they have actually did better and they developed in this period. And when experts and donors are coming here, they shall. I tell them, I'll always tell them that they shall think about what happened in Georgia and then provide, they shall understand what happened in 1990s in Georgia, and then they shall provide consultancy on basis of these facts, to take into consideration all these facts, because they perceive as Georgia is same with the other countries, but they have been going through different paths, and we've been going through different paths. When we are speaking about various crops. We actually had the collapse of the science, we had the collapse of agriculture. We do not have any labs, we do not have scientific centers. Everything have been sold and destroyed in 1990s, and we are actually starting from the scratch. And only new generation who has a very big initiative can start it over. We have a burden of the past on our shoulders, and we think that we have some experience, but the world is going at a very different pace. For instance, the nurseries in the Soviet Union, it took to select the new breed for 35 years. During the Soviet period, but today world does not have 35 years in order to breed new variety and to introduce it to the nature. So it should be done within the much shorter period, and we shall be able to go with a faster pace than we are doing today. When we have such a project like Plant the Future, and which helps us to introduce new varieties in our country, and our project covers 35,000 hectares already, and when we do not know still what kind of varieties we are breeding here, are they market oriented, is there demand in the global market for such varieties? Yeah, because we are investing in this, the state is investing in this, and we do not know whether we will be able to sell them at the global market. So I don't know, maybe we have do we need a thin shell or thick shell? There are very many details, but we shall go through this route. And in parallel, we shall develop the science, agronomy, the technologies for building orchards, nurseries, and that's what we are doing. All the state projects are trying to do this. Of course, we are committing some errors. We are trying to overcome some problems, but what's the most important is that our friends are standing beside us, and such events like we have today is extremely important, because that's where we have possibility to learn about their experiences, to see how their sector develops, how their nuts sector develops. We can see that the pace is quite high, and but we can see that we also have some improvements due to such an exchange of the experiences, and our farmers are learning more, and they are becoming more knowledgeable. But still, we still have to go through quite a long development in order to achieve some levels that will be acceptable at the global market. For instance, in Ozurgeti, we see there's Corneli Lomadze, one farmer who is picking 4 tons of the harvest in his farm, and he's a stable farmer, but his neighbor tries to convince us that it is not necessary to take care of the nuts, and he is picking just 500 kilos, while Mr. Corneli is picking 4 tons. Why is this meeting is important? Because we will listen to the experience of our friends. We will have discussion. We will have vision. Here we have friends who will tell us what they have to do, and Mari Todua, she has returned from the United States recently, and she was actually working on this nut sector, and she can tell us very many new things. I see my friend Giga Kitoshia, who has actually changed the trade, and he came from the communications field, and now he is owner of the huge nuts plantations, and he destroyed plantations, and his experience will be very important. These are the people who understand all the advices, all the recommendations, and they will return to us, to state. I represent the state now, you know, and because they will help us to make our projects more success-oriented, development-oriented, and we shall think also on involving more youth. And Miss Katerina, yesterday we had a meeting here, we had a panel, agricultural panel here, and I was speaking, and I was saying that young people are coming to us, and that's very good. And there was one interesting young person who was from Guria, and he was speaking about GDP of Guria, and that's the first time I have heard such thing. And you know, that there are people in farms who are actually understanding these proper categories. They can assess situations properly, and that's a very big incentive for me as for the deputy minister, because I see that my country has a future. And I would like to thank you personally for organizing this event. You are doing great business to help farmers, to help Georgian agriculture. That's very impressive. Your analysis is always impressive, your presentations, and I hope that today we will be able to also listen to very many important pieces of information. Thank you very much, and welcome everybody once again.
Ուղղումեսի մանլոբա բատոնո Գյորգի
Thank you very much, Mr. Georgi.
Really, and would like to invite Katerina Björlin-Hansen, who is Regional Director in Caucasus from European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. It's great to see so many people so early for being Georgia. It's a delight, but the topic is very interesting indeed. I would like to thank the representatives of the Ukrainian Nut Association, who, despite all the difficulties, managed to come here to Georgia today. I would like to thank the Deputy Minister for his participation this morning and for the continuous cooperation and support. We really enjoyed and we really appreciate it. And I would like to thank the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, our long-standing partner in Eastern Europe, South Caucasus, and Central Asia. I'm really delighted that today's event is actually happening in person, undeterred by Russia's illegal war against Ukraine. So we strongly condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and we deplore all the human suffering that it has caused. It strikes the very core values of EBRD that we established 30 years ago when we were inaugurated. The bank has responded very quickly and decisively to support Ukraine in this difficult situation, and we have supported both the real economy and the people of Ukraine. In Ukraine, the agribusiness is, of course, of key importance, and this is when the country and the sector needs our support most. So we are laying the ground for a strong recovery, which will surely follow this disastrous war. It is very important both for Ukraine and the world at large, because there is a looming threat to global food security. Over the years, EBRD has invested almost 300 million euros in Georgia's agribusiness, and we are very keen to continue this support. The development of the agribusiness sector is one of EBRD's key priorities in the country, and our commitment is as strong as ever. EBRD and FAO have a joint initiative to improve high-value trade opportunities in the region, and nuts is one of these. Together, we are supporting different segments of agriculture production across Georgia, Moldova, Tajikistan, Ukraine, and Uzbekistan, and we allow businesses to exchange knowledge, improve capacity, and we facilitate business connections, which are of key importance in trade. The nut industry is quite new for Georgia, but during the last 10 years, the sector has developed very impressively, especially the almond and walnut production. Georgian businesses are actively developing and attracting investments in both modern growing and processing technologies. Through the EU EBRD credit lines, we have been able to provide both financing and advice for the development of several hazelnut and walnut production facilities, and to help improve the production quality and increase the production capacity. Nuts are an economically attractive crop and which enjoys an increasing global demand. The value is higher than most fruit and vegetables, require fewer inputs and labor per hectare, and of course it is not as perishable as fruits and vegetables, so it's easy to export. Georgia has successfully shown how this is doable. The country has earned more than $1.2 billion exporting nuts over the past 10 years. Considering the size of the country, this is a truly amazing figure. And today, Georgia is one of the top 5 global hazelnut exporters, despite all the challenges to get to this point. Just before COVID-19, we organized the first comprehensive business event on the nut sector in Georgia. It was a really interesting and well-attended event. And we were, of course, hoping to do this more often, but COVID made a break in this, so here we are again. I'm very pleased. At the time, we covered the entire nut sector and provided an effective platform for stakeholders and potential investors to share international best practice. Since then, there have been significant improvements, and today the Georgian nut industry is able to share its experience with Ukrainian colleagues. It is great that this can happen in person because, of course, we are all completely zoomed out and we much enjoy speaking to a real person. So I'm very glad that today's event has attracted so much attention. Once again, I would like to thank our Ukrainian partners for attending, despite the difficulties of actually getting here. As the largest institutional investor, both in Georgia and Ukraine, we at EBRD were delighted to contribute to the exchange between the two countries. I wish everyone interesting discussions today, and once again, thank you for attending this morning.
Thank you very much for support, EBRD for support, and also for support to this project. And now I would like to invite Iya Mirazanashvili, Head of Program Unit of FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization of United Nations, Country Office.
Thank you. So I will use Georgian in my speech.
Welcome everybody on behalf of Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, representation to Georgia. I welcome all the distinguished guests, Georgians, my friends from Ukraine. Our today's conference is supported by EBRD and FAO, as it has been mentioned, and it's part of our broad initiative, and it aims towards improving access to the high-value markets for the farmers. This program is being implemented in Georgia, in Moldova, Ukraine, in Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. This regional program is extremely important, in my opinion, for Georgia too, because the development of gardening sector in Georgia is depending on it quite extensively. We are trying to build capacities, we are trying to raise awareness on the global markets among the local farmers, and we are implementing quite a number of successful projects. One of them is Plant the Future, and we have also taken some activities under this project. In the countries that I have already listed, we have conducted many different events that were dedicated to the issues of the orchard growing, nuts crops, and so we have under this project we established the platform eastfruit.com that provides daily the marketing information, and this is aimed towards farmers as well as the traders. And our today's meeting is now being streamed on the eastfruit.com YouTube channel right now. And those people, those who were unable to join us live, they will have a possibility to watch our discussions and presentations live in the YouTube channel. These efforts are very important for Georgia because it has a positive impact on the revenues of the farmers as well as on the general revenues of the countries from export. The experience shows us that in the global markets are very well accepting the high value crops from Georgia, products from Georgia like wine or nuts, hazelnuts. And Mr. Gela has mentioned here that nut production is quite well developed in Georgia already because hazelnuts are taking quite a decent place in the total exports of our country, and it has very big economic importance. Very recently, the Minister of Environmental Protection and Agriculture has announced the launch of new state program that will be supporting this production of hazelnuts, and of course FAO welcomes this initiative, and we are ready to provide any support that is needed from our side. That's as for the hazelnut. As for the walnuts and almonds, they do not have such a long-standing history in our country, and this program, as I have mentioned, also supports building the walnut and almond orchards because it also has very high potential in our country. The revenues from the almond exports already exceeds $2 million, and this trend is permanently growing because they are building more and more the almond orchards in our country, and at the same time we are also developing the processing facilities for these crops, and this allows us producing high quality products. And if for almond is mainly aiming towards is produced mainly for the export, but the producers of walnuts are aiming to the local markets mainly. And actually, this is the first year that our walnut production has fully satisfied the local demand, and it has replaced fully import this year. That was the first year, and our representative association will speak about this in their presentation later. So our ultimate goal, I think, that we shall be aiming is to send the walnuts as well as almonds to the export, and also we shall raise awareness among local producers, and we shall strengthen their competitiveness. And FAO is providing certain assistance with this regard, and here we shall also. It will be very interesting to listen to the experiences of our friendly nations, and that's what Ukrainians will be doing today. And I would like to join now Mr. Gela and EBRD representative, and I would like to thank our Ukrainian friends, our guests from Ukraine, the Association of Nuts of Ukraine, because they managed, despite all the difficulties, they managed to join us, and they will be sharing their knowledge and experience with us today. Ukraine, as it has been mentioned, is one of the largest global exporters of hazelnuts. However, unfortunately, the Russian aggression has created barriers for this. It has reduced the production of hazelnuts, and supply chains have been distorted, and this of course created threats for the food security, both at the national level and at the global level. And FAO is performing certain actions already, activities to overcome this, to eliminate these threats, and we hope that war will end soon and the country will continue developing in a peaceful environment, and they will still continue sharing their experience with us. As for events held by FAO in Georgia, I would like to mention, besides those programs that I have already mentioned, that with we are also implementing one project with the financial support of EBRD that implies providing assistance to the producers of walnuts and almonds, and so together with our association we have conducted trainings trainings for the producers of walnut and almond producers, as well as for the agronomers. And these trainings actually covered the broad range of various issues, but I shall mention today, as Mr. Gela said, it's very important to, first of all, to identify what challenges we are facing, because we shall understand what to teach the farmers and producers. And the first component was we were trying to identify the main challenges existing in this field in our country, and then we shall try to overcome these challenges. And these trainings covered the farm design, the variety selection, variety differentiation, integrated pest management, harvesting and harvest processing, and also modern methods of management of walnut and almond orchards. And the beneficiaries, who were mainly from Kakheti and Shida-Kartli, they managed to improve their production, or they were able to better grow their trees, to develop their orchards. And this, of course, improved the quality of the produce, as well as minimized the losses. Of course, this brings about the financial revenues, and then it also helps our agriculture development in general for the country. I think I'm speaking too long already, and now I would like to finish, and so I finish with this, and now I pass the floor to Katerina. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ia, for such an interesting presentation. Now we can already begin our conference. And first presentation, I will be making first presentation. I am Katerina Poberezhna, coordinator of the Agricultural Department of European Bank. And if you allow me, I will switch to Ukrainian. Please take the headsets if you need them. We have interpretation here. Just wait a minute until everybody gets the earphones.
So I'm going to give my presentation in Ukrainian, and today we'll talk about global trends in the nut market. I will give you a global picture of what the situation in the nut market, so that you have a general idea. And then after this, our speakers will give greater detail on the situation both in Georgia and in Ukraine for specific nut cultures. So, the dynamics or the trends in nut crops production is one of growth. We can see that the growth there's 100% growth. Here we see almonds, walnut, pistachio, and hazelnuts. And the trend is upwards. We see that roughly 7% production growth per year is observed. We see that world trade is not growing to the same degree. In fact, we only see 2% annual trade growth. In other words, nut production is growing faster than global trade. In other words, there's more and more nuts on the market. And what does that mean? That means that there's quite a bit of pressure on world prices. And what we see over the past 10 years is that there's a drop in global prices. Here are the main nut cultures that are grown. So pistachio, unshelled pistachio, hazelnut, almond, and so forth. However, I would like to point out that not all, so despite the dynamic growth in sales, that doesn't mean that the markets are expanding. For example, if we look at almonds, the average yearly annual growth is just 1%. However, the market is over $5 billion per year. There's a different situation with unshelled hazelnuts. Here, there's more dynamic growth, almost 20% per year, but the market itself is quite a bit smaller, just a bit over $140 million. And what does this mean? What's good about this is that low prices enhance consumption. And so we made a comparison between 2014 and 2020 and observed that consumption of almost all nuts has grown. Most popular are almonds and walnuts. This is the import trends for the largest 10 importing countries. And here we can see that EU countries like Germany and Spain, France, Italy are the largest importers of almonds. And so they have 13, 10, and 6% of the import market. But we also see that in each country, there is a drop in the past year of imports. But I would like to point out once again that we're talking about import of value and not in terms of tons. If we look at the tons of import, we see that there's a very small growth in imports. So that means that each year nuts, in particular almonds, are becoming cheaper each year. And so if we're planning for the long term, we need to keep in consideration, take into account this global trend. A somewhat better situation observed in hazelnut import. There's more concentrated trade in hazelnuts, and over 50% of imports are in the EU. But in Germany, Germany is growing its import over the past season. The same situation, the same negative trend in imports is observed for walnuts. But in Kazakhstan and Korea, so more Asian countries, they are becoming more interested, at least in terms of the past 2 seasons. They are growing their increasing imports of walnuts, in particular from China. As for factors that are affecting world trade that we need to take into consideration, first of all, recovery of demand after the pandemic, because we know that demand dropped due to the pandemic, and a significant role was due to increased air travel, because in airports the main snack is nuts. Another factor is the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, because this has put inflationary pressure on food prices and utilities worldwide, 9.9% in the Eurozone. And this, of course, contributes to the increase in the cost of living of consumers of nut crops. And so they try to buy groceries that cost less. And so we expect a drop in demand for expensive nuts such as pistachios or macadamias, which don't grow in Georgia. But perhaps this will positively affect almonds because it is more of a mass product and is the cheapest of these nut cultures. In this way, expensive snacks are losing popularity while the confectionery industry is suffering from high electricity prices. And so factories are lowering their production in Europe due to high energy costs. And of course, there's a growing cost of transportation during the pandemic, and these costs remain very high. Deglobalization is occurring, and trade is dropping. It's becoming more local. And so this means that production is becoming more and more industrial, and also quality is improving. And of course, we know about the Green Deal, because it is expected that the conditions which European producers work in will be applied automatically to EU importers. And the US is concerned about this, and so we need to watch this situation very carefully. But this is the current situation at the moment. Now let's look at the situation in the market. You all probably know that world production this year for almonds has dropped a bit. However, there's no hope that export will increase, because once again, logistics are very important. There's drop in demand in the main importing countries. And for example, Australia and the US are producing a lot. According to the latest information, they're having difficulties exporting their products. And Spain is importing less. In Australia, production hasn't changed much, but they hope to have more. They hope to export more due to growing demand in China. A similar situation is observed in the hazelnut market. There's weaker demand and pressure on prices. There's production growth in Turkey, however. Due to inflation in Turkey, this is making their exports. It's making exports harder to. So exports are dropping in Turkey due to high energy prices, despite the inflation occurring in their country, and depreciation of the Turkish lira. So this situation is affecting both the Georgia and Turkey. And let's now look at the situation with walnuts, where we see a pole shift because China has begun increasing its production and export, and now they are taking Central Asian countries under their export influence. We see a drop in production in Ukraine due to the invasion, and we see export growing from Turkey. And even in Azerbaijan and Iraq, we see a growth in imports. And this is interesting for the Caucasus market of walnut production, in particular Georgia. So if we take all of this into consideration, we need to be very careful about investing in nut growing, and we need to be prepared for difficult times ahead. And what conclusions can we make at the end? The growth of production of major nut crops outstrips the growth of trade, and this puts pressure on prices. What's also important is that a stronger dollar means more expensive imports from the US. And perhaps this creates an opportunity for local producers or regional producers, but at the same time, the US provides a particular level of quality that importers are used to, and so we need to match this quality. And of course, we need to focus on producing high quality processed goods. And finally, high inflation forces consumers to abandon expensive nuts, which opens up opportunities for more affordable varieties of nuts. So I tried to give you a general picture of the market, the world markets at the current time. Thank you for your attention, and I'd like to invite the next speaker, Andriy Yarmak, who's an economist from the Investment Center of the FAO, who will give a more detailed analysis of the nut sector in Ukraine. Thank you. Hello, good morning.
If you don't mind, so you'll need translation. But in the recent months, I've seen a lot of people actually learning Ukrainian even in Georgia. That was really amazing. Переключаюсь на українську мову. Вітаю всіх.
I'll turn to Ukrainian now. I'm speaking Ukrainian for the first time in a Ukrainian conference in Georgia, but we planned to do this before the war began. Even last year, we planned to conduct this conference in Georgia because we truly value the experience that our Georgian partners and nut producers have accumulated, and we see a very fast, rapid development in the production and format of nut production in Georgia. And we have a YouTube channel where we have videos from Georgian plantations, and we see a very high level of interest in the region. There's a lot of interest from viewers and potential nut producers. And so we wanted to highlight these developments. Unfortunately, we weren't able to conduct this event at the scale we'd like, but we hope that after Ukraine's victory, we will return to our old format, where there's a lot of nut producers from Ukraine who come to visit Georgia and see how you are producing nuts. And we would also like to invite you to Ukraine when it's safe there, because we also have a lot to share and teach others. Now I'd like to move on to my presentation. And I've been asked to talk about the Ukrainian nut market, but I cannot begin without telling you about more global aspects and say a bit more about what Katerina mentioned. Because in order to understand the trends in each country, we need to look at the global tendencies, the global trends, and I'm unable to do otherwise. So basically, the first thing that we need to remember, that is that nuts are the largest category of agricultural trade in the fruit market, even larger than bananas. It's easier to move nuts around than fresh fruits because they don't spoil, they're easier to move around, and their price is relatively high. And so the transportation costs don't have so much of an impact on international trade as for cheaper goods. That's the first factor. The second is that as we analyze nuts, we should treat nuts as a group of fruits which include, for example, peanuts, which in essence is not a nut. However, it's used and treated as a nut. So it's actually not a classical nut, but we need to include it in the nut category. Let's move forward. You can see the international trade structure on the graph that I showed. So this graph answers many questions, and you can look through these presentations later because we will send them to you. We'll take pictures of these presentations, but I'd like to point out a few important factors. This is the volume of international trade compared to the overall international trade market. I'm talking about international trade and international production. So what we see is that international production is quite low quality. And when we add it all together, we get a picture that doesn't tell us much because we make a lot of it can cause us to make a lot of mistakes. And so if we look at the numbers for international trade, that actually gives us more information. There we can see how demand is changing. And demand is the main driver of production. If there's demand for your good, then you will produce more of it. Everything's simple. And so, looking at this graph, we can see a very interesting thing. We've always talked about four classic nuts. So, in our region at least. So, walnuts, hazelnuts, first of all, and also almonds and pistachio. So, four nuts that everyone's heard of. But in the past 5 years in international trade, cashew was the main nut. And so we can't put aside cashew because it's a competitor of all other nuts. And I'd also like to remind you, of course, about the cheapest nut, peanut, the peanut. And so we have 6 nuts of interest. And here is the situation that I think will enter marketing textbooks of the future, business textbooks of the future, and that is the story of the cashew nut. 5 years ago, we were saying that that trade and production of cashew is growing at crazy speed and moving faster than all other nuts. But then what happened is something impossible to believe. Because this nut is mainly produced in developing countries in Asia, first of all, and then production began in African countries, which are also very poor. This nut gained particular state importance. And these relatively poor states began providing government subsidies to local producers. And what happens when subsidies occur? When subsidies are used, you make the situation worse for producers. I'm talking about direct subsidies. And so what happened is that this nut began being produced in very large amounts, and competition moved towards the price. So price competition began. It was a race to the bottom, and by 2020, when international trade shut down because of COVID, Asia shut down first, and this nut was produced in such large amounts, and it couldn't be sent anywhere. And so it began spoiling. They began destroying orchards in poor countries. And one other problem with subsidizing production in poor countries, they typically don't have a reserve of production capacity that you see in more wealthy countries that allow them to survive difficult times. And so over the past couple years, cashew has flattened out and began dropping. So production is dropping and international trade in cashew is dropping. However, cashews have a future. This is simply an example of how not to do business. So you never need to engage in price competition. You need to engage in quality competition. You need to produce high quality nuts that you can sell for a high price. And the other part of this graph are the so-called small nuts. So macadamia nuts, areca, Brazil nuts, chestnuts, which are very important, in particular for the Caucasus region, and the kola nut. They account for a small percentage of international nut trade. But I have a story about macadamia nuts. My son was studying in school with a girl from Africa, and she said that in her country they could grow macadamia. This could be a good business for their country. And 1 year later, I heard that her family had just begun creating a macadamia orchard, which is a very good idea because there's a growing demand for macadamia nuts. And so it's a good opportunity to observe these trends, and I've heard that Georgia, for example, is taking advantage of growing demand for pistachio. And this is one of the most profitable nuts for international trade. Of course, there are many nuances, and I've seen videos of how pistachios are grown in California, and you can watch them and learn quite a bit. So this picture of international trade shows that demand for peanut is growing faster than any other nuts. And this isn't even a nut, so to speak. And because our conference is Ukrainian run, I would like to mention that over the past few years, peanuts have gained more and more interest from Ukrainian producers. So Ukrainian has a lot of potential and interest in peanut production. And in Uzbekistan, where we also work, one of the most important export markets is peanuts. So pay attention to this very important and interesting nut culture, both for internal consumption and for export. So I'd like to move now to the Ukrainian market. I am often happy to see, I see that Ukraine is a kind of northern nut anomaly. Why do I call it an anomaly? An anomaly? Because most nut producers worldwide have a milder climate than Ukraine. They have a longer growing season than Ukraine. And nonetheless, Ukraine is one of the world leaders in terms of walnut export. And this is truly hard to believe. You might think, okay, walnut, that makes sense. But then Ukraine took the first place in hazelnut production. And this was also a surprise all over the world among nut specialists that I've spoken to. And perhaps you know, and I'm sure Ukrainians know, perhaps Georgians don't know, but Ukraine is currently talking about expanding its almond orchards and experimenting with varieties that are adapted to the Ukrainian climate. However, currently walnuts account for more than 99% of all nut exports from Ukraine. So if we had at least 1% of hazelnuts, or maybe 10% of hazelnuts and almonds, that would be very good. And I would like to remind you once again what the history of this business can teach us, particularly the history of cashews. It's important to engage in quality competition, not price competition. So we need to strive for higher quality. It's no good to lower your prices to compete for low prices. I don't remember what year the association was created in 2008. Okay, in 2008, through my initiative, we had the first Ukrainian Nut Conference. And at this conference, the Ukrainian Nut Association was created. And we, at the time, talked about nuts as an expensive, exclusive consumer product. You can remember, I think, how much walnuts cost in Georgia. But I forgot to say why we want to conduct this conference in Georgia. Because I don't know any other country in the world that eats so much nuts, so many walnuts as Georgia. I've seen walnuts everywhere, in desserts, in soups, in snacks, in different dishes. I've never seen a country use so many nuts. So I think at the time, in 2008, it seemed like nuts were an exclusive, highly expensive good. But since then, we've seen that nuts have become a mass product. And when you have a mass product, that means you have a large assortment and a large choice. And when you have a large choice, what do you choose? You choose the more high quality goods. Now, let's talk about some trends in walnut export from Ukraine. So, over the past 2 years, 2 or 3 years, in the global market, Ukraine is taking the place. Ukraine is being replaced by China, which is taking more and more of the market. We see exporters from Georgia and Central Asia who are also growing their export volumes. And after the collapse in price earlier in the 2000s, prices have somewhat recovered. And so when you're calculating the price for the past over the past 5 years, you need to take 10 cents off the price per kilo for each year. And this gives you a more accurate picture. And Katerina talked about the drop in price. And when we see that we're on the brink of a global recession or even depression, we can see that the prospects might be quite difficult for nut prices, above all. So I'd like to talk about walnut export in Ukraine. And as I said, it's over 99% of all nut exports in Ukraine. And that includes shelled and unshelled nuts. I've also mentioned peanuts. So I'd like to now talk about what will happen after Ukraine's victory in the war. Nobody knows what will happen with the nut market, but I think it's fairly safe to assume that what we might see is we don't know what the macroeconomic situation in the world will be, and in Ukraine. We can't know this a few years in advance. But if there's money and if there's investment in the sector, and we expect that there will be limited investments in this due to the high cost of credit, I think that investment will be made in other types of agriculture. As we see, agriculture is blocked in Ukraine. The ports are blocked. The partial unblocking of ports for the grain deal has not solved the issue. And so we're going to see increasing interest in projects that can recover their investments as quickly as possible. And so perhaps for a period of time, there will be a drop in activity in the nut market. As for the internal domestic market, most of all, we expect a drop in demand. Perhaps exports will grow, in fact, but because they'll need liquidity, and producers that already have orchards and who are able to preserve them, those who have their own production, their own processing plants, I think they will be in a good position. We also need to take into consideration global trends. As I mentioned, we are on the brink of a global recession or even depression, and this can negatively impact the trends in the nut market worldwide. However, everything is changing very quickly, and the U.S. has an important impact. As you know, in California, there are water problems, and production is dropping in the U.S., and so this could help renew Ukrainian nut production. And so it's hard to predict what will happen. Now, what is happening in China also has a large impact. If there's a recession in China, perhaps consumption in China will drop, but export will increase. And this can also affect the world prices, the world nut prices. Now, I'd like to say a few words about our project, where to find out more information about us. East Fruit Side has nut prices. It has descriptions, market descriptions. There's information in Ukrainian, English, and Russian, and also Uzbek. So I invite you to look at our research and learn more about us. The marketplaces that we have over 30,000 participants in. There's a marketplace for producers, those who have nurseries, who sell seedlings, and so forth. We also have our Facebook page, which you know about. Thank you for attention, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
No questions.
Дякую за дуже детальний огляд. Very much.
Thank you.
I would like now to invite our international consultant of FAU Investment Center, Nika Japaridze, to speak about Georgia. What's going on in the Georgian nuts sector overall?
Good afternoon. I'm Nika Japaridze, UN consultant, market analyst, and fruit team member. Before I start my presentation, I would like to wish my Ukrainian friends rapid win and peace in their country. So our speakers will describe the main specifics of Georgian market in their presentation, so I will be quite concise today. My presentation is mainly based on the official statistics and the trends and the opportunities that we can see from the statistics. I will not be speaking about current season. The following speakers from the local associations will provide much more interesting information. First of all, I would like to stress how important it is these nuts crops are important for Georgian economy. Within the recent 8 years, Georgian farmers have received over 6 billion USD revenues from the sales of nuts, and 0.5 billion comes from the hazelnuts. And that's interesting because in our country with a tradition of grape growing, the hazelnuts are already approaching these values the same, and also it's their volume is much bigger than apple, nectarine, pear, etc. So we can see that our market is quite large, and but when we have a large market, so we always have a suspicion whether it's possible or not to grow further. But statistics shows that from our nuts, it's very important to have opportunity to grow further, which will mean more revenues for the local producers. We have mainly 3 crops. This is hazelnut, walnut, and almond in the Georgian market, and I will go through them one by one. Hazelnut is the main export crops, and Georgia actually is exporting hazelnut produced here. If farmers have received about 500 million revenue from this export, but added value was created by the exporters, and country has received about 1 billion of revenues from this export. The hazelnut market can be even bigger in Georgia, so we shall look at the price differences between Turkey and Georgia. We know that Turkey is the main supplier at the global markets, and Turkish prices, FOB prices, are higher, 10 to 20% higher than Georgian prices. And as we have seen, this is mainly due to the difference in quality. That has already been mentioned by our previous speakers. If we will recalculate how much bigger revenues can be received by Georgia if would they be able to sell at the same price as Turkey. We can see that during the last 8 years, the revenues from the exports of the shelled nuts should be about $130 billion. That's about 10% of the total export. And so therefore, the hazelnut market has very big potential of growth if we will be concentrating on the quality improvement. So let's switch to the walnuts. Unlike hazelnut, walnut is mainly consumed locally. Georgia actually is not practically is not exporting walnut, but it will change very soon because very huge investments were performed in walnut in Georgia, and the walnut is fourth most popular investment product in the program, under the program that is supported by the state. And it is interesting that per capita consumption in Georgia is 2-3 times higher than in the developed markets, and therefore additional sales of increasing local market will be quite difficult. So therefore we have such opportunities who will be taking this hazelnut walnut from the orchards. They will have opportunity to export this. Also the marketing companies have big opportunities because the walnut will need quite a serious marketing in order to take its niche at the global markets. So also the statistics also show us one or more opportunity. In Georgia, productivity, despite the recent investments, the walnut productivity is very low. So therefore, the country has an opportunity to grow productivity in already existing orchards, and if you're going to develop new orchards, you should know that you should be concentrating on the productivity, because it will make you more competitive, which will be better for both for you and for the country. Let's speak about the almonds. Almonds for Georgian market, this is a news in the Georgian market, but the almond will grow very rapidly and very actively. With the support of the state, the almond is the second most popular product from the standpoint of investment within the recent years. According to local association, within the next 6 to 7 years, production of almond will increase tenfold. We will have following opportunities. Everybody understands that the local market won't be able to consume so much almond, so they should be exported. We have analogically the same situation as with the walnuts here, because we can establish such companies that will be exporting Georgian almond and almond products to the foreign markets. Also, marketing will be important here exactly for the same reasons as it was for the walnut. It is interesting that consumption of almond in Georgia is very low. So almond is more consumed in the high revenue countries, but also we have some low revenue countries which consume twice as much almond as Georgia per capita. So therefore it will be there will be opportunities to popularize almond in the local market too. I will now I would like to discuss with you the recent dynamics existing in this. As Katerina said, inflation is a global problem currently. It's a problem for Georgia too, and for Georgian farmers. Due to the global crisis, the prices are going down, and high inflation means that farmer prices are reduced, and so they can buy much less product on the same amount than they could do it in the 2014. But that's a global challenge, you can't avoid it. However, we have very good forecast. IMF says that in a couple of years Georgia will hit its inflation target, which is 3%, which means that the prices won't go down. Maybe, but the rapid growth of the prices will stop in the Georgian market. Thank you for your attention.
Presentation, and now we need to go on another side. So we would like to invite the president of the Ukrainian Nuts Association, Gennady Yudin, to speak about Ukrainian nut strategies.
Доброго дня, шановні колеги.
Hello, dear colleagues, or as our Ukrainian hosts love to say, Gamarjoba Genosvale. Because Ukraine and Georgia have a great tradition, common traditions, common interests, and we are united by a desire to be free. And in our countries, at our war fronts, we have a very strong Georgian volunteer group, volunteer battalion, which is the strongest of all volunteer battalions fighting in the war in Ukraine. So thank you very much. Today's conference is a step towards peace with our partners around the world. And thank you very much to the hosts of this conference and to the FAO project, the team of which has created this project in Georgia for us in this very difficult time. Georgia today is in the top 5, one of the top 5 leaders in terms of hazel exports. So we have a lot to learn from them. Who are we? As Andrei said, in 2008, the Ukrainian Nut Association was established. And now it is a nut industry association that brings together growers, exporters, nurseries, in which cover over 13,000 hectares of lands, of orchards. I would like to present my colleagues Maxim Sheiko, who is a powerful producer, who has a great orchard of hazelnuts in Ukraine, Vadim Boyko, who, together with his team, is implementing state-of-the-art growing methods. Our colleague who is working together with you, with our Georgian colleagues here in Georgia. We are working constantly in Ukraine. We're constantly working on the global objective of renewing a state program of nut growing. We would like to promote the nut sector in the global markets. Here we are showing the vector of our efforts in the forms of 3 big fish. These are the 3 vectors of our operations, the 3 directions. Walnuts, hazelnuts, and almonds. You can see on the screen that currently the area covered by walnuts and hazelnut orchards is almost identical, and almond orchards occupy a very small territory, but almonds are a new area of work which has over 200 hectares and is growing. And these are the 3 big fish that I should have shown earlier by pressing the button. On this diagram you can see that 10 years ago, practically 10 years ago, we began planting walnut trees. But We had powerful growth only over the last 5 years. In the past 5 years, we have made walnuts the main nut crop. Before that, hazelnuts were in the first place. And moving forward, we expect the area covered by walnut orchards to grow. And as Andrei said in his presentation, the difficulties that we've faced in 2021 due to COVID has stopped because of the war. However, as we look forward to the trends in planting in the future, we expect that we will have 30,000 hectares by 2030. Most of this will be hazelnuts. Also, over the past 5 years, a new line of production has begun, and that is organic nut orchards. Especially over the past 5 years, we've seen a growth in planting, and next year we expect to begin exporting our first shipments of organic nuts. And we think that by 2030, no less than 20% of our exports will be organic hazelnuts. As you can see, the state program of supporting nut production has helped us a lot over the past 4 years. And this helped us in 4 ways. The first the first is that 44% there's been a 44% compensation of costs for planting. The state has also covered some of the expenses having to do with equipment. And this program, unfortunately, is no longer operational, but it has created the conditions for us to plant almost half of all the nut orchards in Ukraine. We see that the brand of health food is only beginning to gain importance in Ukraine. We see that we're the second place. We're in the second place of nut exports. We've only sent our first shipment of organic hazelnuts. But next, for domestic production, we've only produced our first shipment, our first group of organic hazelnuts, and next year we expect to export our first shipment. So over the past 5 years, we see the same trends. EU markets have bought both nuts, walnuts, and also unshelled walnuts. Nothing has changed. However, we see that there's been a slowdown in export that has affected us. However, prices have begun to grow. Because last year, because of we saw the first shipment of orchard walnuts. The problems in our sector are that 90% of our nuts were gathered, were harvested in household orchards and roadside orchards, and that has not allowed us to have the right level of quality for exports. We don't have uniform quality in our products, but now we are uniting our orchards. We're bringing quality in line with expectations, and this is making exports more profitable. Quality is the top objective of our program for walnuts. One of the important aspects of improving quality is exporting organic nuts, creating a pool of organic nuts. And we have over 800 hectares which are going to be exporting organic nuts abroad. So yes, we will continue collecting. We will continue using nuts produced by households and roadside orchards, but these nuts will be used mainly for processed goods. For example, nut oils, nut pastes, and using nuts in food processing. As we saw in the previous slide, we are lowering our exports of unshelled nuts, and we're increasing our exports of processed nuts, shelled nuts. So what's happening with hazelnuts? Hazelnuts are being imported into Ukraine. Over 1,500 tons of exports, hazelnuts are being imported by Ukraine, which is coming in part from Georgia. But look at the prices. They're very attractive. And so there's hope that when the war ends, this direct corridor, which is logistically most convenient between Odessa and Batumi, will allow Ukraine to import Georgian hazelnuts directly into the country. Let's look at almonds now. Almonds are consumed by Ukrainians even in even greater amounts, and so we import quite a bit each year, and we hardly have any harvestable almond orchards in the country yet. It'll take another 3 or 4 years, but we visited Georgian almond orchards in Udabno, for example, and we hope that these nuts will be imported from Batumi to Odessa, which will be the best import route for Ukraine. And also look at the attractive prices. What are our steps to developing our strategy? First of all, we need to cover our internal demand. We need to create, after looking at our Georgian colleagues' certificates, we also need to have a registry of orchards. We need to have a certification process, and we need to look forward towards creating this type of system. We need to focus on cooperation. We need to focus on processing, which is in an embryonic state. And so that is our task for the coming years. Also, we have hazelnut orchards that are working according to organic standards, and they will be included in the organic nut pools as well. We'll have 5 regional nut plants to process nuts, and we need to have 5, and we have 3 already. One is in Odessa at the feedback nut producer. There's one in Khmelnytsky region, and one is in the central part of the country. processing hazelnuts is a very important field of work for us. And we have begun producing our first hazelnut oil, hazelnut paste, and hazelnut flour, or hazelnut meal. And if we have already worked on rebranding our walnut exports, and we have we need to have two nut brands that are recognized worldwide in hazelnuts and in almonds. This is something we've been working on quite a bit and will continue promoting in external markets by participating in international exhibitions in which we're helped by the International Trade Center project, which operates in Ukraine. And currently we have a representative office of SIAL, and so we're no longer asked whose hazelnut you're supplying when we visit these different trade shows, because they know that we have our own producer now. One of the important ways of promoting our activities is through our website, our association's website, where we present all our achievements, all of our developments over the recent years. Also, we have a catalog which we publish in English, and this is the only publication that shows all the structure of our nut sector in Ukraine. The leading producers of hazelnuts, walnuts, and almonds, and the producers of equipment that operate in the sector. As for our future moving forward, what do we expect to see? We expect to see more and more commercial orchards with high-tech equipment that are producing results. We expect to see cooperation between large and small producers to increase commercial trade volumes of high-quality nuts. And that includes traceable, high-quality, identifiable goods. And of course, once again, nut processing. So I'd like to thank you now for your attention. But first of all, I'd like to thank you for supporting us. Thank you for helping us. Thank you for the titanic efforts in terms of analysis. We are learning a lot from the analytical materials which are created by our specialist Andriy Yermak, and I'm very thankful to him for his constant analysis, which is our compass and our guidebook for working forward, working on developing our activities. And so today in our nut sector, we have established an award, the Gold Mark. And this is our sector award. And we only give it to the most outstanding nut producers and leaders, managers, and people who help the nut sector to move forward, to make progress towards growing and developing. And so with great pleasure, I would like to present, on behalf of the Presidium of our association, I would like to present this Gold Mark Award to Andriy Yermak, leader in the nut sector, and let this Gold Mark Award be a sign of our great appreciation of your hard work in the sector. Thank you, Andriy. I would also like to give words of gratitude to two of your Georgian colleagues. And for this, I will ask my my deputy president of the association to come forward and present awards, gratitude plaques to Mirab Chitonava, head of the board of directors of the Association of Hazelnut Producers of Hazelnut Growers of Georgia. We've been working with this association for 3 years now, and we feel their constant support and friendship. And thank you to our colleagues from the Hazelnut Association, Hazelnut Growers Association. Thank you for your. We have met this. Our Georgian colleagues in 2017, and from this meeting, our meeting was the beginning of the development of our orchard. He showed us the first steps in hazelnut production. He showed us which varieties need to be grown, which varieties have enjoy demand in world markets, and he helped us to bring the first Italian seedlings, and he provided us with these Italian seedlings. And so I would like to shake his hand and thank him for his efforts. For me, this is one of my most important friends in Georgia. I love him. Thank you. We would also like to extend our gratitude Georgi Todria, director of the association. So please send your gratitude to Hrihori for us. Thank you.
Чудово, дякую вам.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your presentations, for your thanks, and for your awards.
Thank you so much. Now I would like to invite Ruslan Sula, Ukrainian who lives in Georgia for some time already, who is a specialist in nuts, and he will be speaking about specifics of Ukrainian nuts growing and what can Ukraine learn from Georgia.
Доброго дня, Гамаджоба.
Good morning. I'm a Ukrainian specialist in growing nuts, and I've learned a lot in Georgia from about nut production. I've also observed nut production, especially hazelnut production development in Ukraine, and after I began taking interest in this, specialists told me to visit Turkey and Georgia to see how it's done. And that's how our story, how our background developed in Georgia. What are the particular features of Ukrainian production that we can learn from Georgia? And that's the subject of my presentation. Considering how production is developing in Ukraine, cooperation is developing in Ukraine between Ukraine and Georgia, which started in 2016. We know the Hazelnut Grower Association, and they have shown us what is done in hazelnut production in Georgia. They showed us how intensive orchards are operating in Georgia. After studying the experience in Georgia, we came to the conclusion that we can begin our own production, and we created hazelnut orchards using the same varieties that are produced in Georgia. And with Italian specialists, we laid the groundwork for Tonjufon variety hazelnut. And starting in 2016, we have planted roughly 3,000 hectares of commercial Tondojofoni variety hazelnuts. And from 5,000 new hectares, most is covered by this variety. Traditionally, walnuts are produced in Ukraine. The other culture that has been produced since Soviet times is hazelnuts. Moving forward, we see that almond production is just getting started, and there is a lot of room for it to grow. I'd like to point out a comparison of conditions for growing nuts in Georgia and Ukraine. Georgia is a warmer country, and it has sections that have subtropical climate, which is ideal for many types of nut production. Ukraine has colder climates, has a colder winter, and so the climate is more difficult for hazelnut production, as Andrei Yermak has shown. It is a miracle that Ukraine is able to produce so much nuts. At the same time, when we analyze what's happening around the world, when we analyze the East Fruit project, for example, when we see what's happening in California, top orchards in Turkey and Italy, we came to the conclusion that walnut should be a lateral direction of work, and so we have developed walnut production with large walnuts, and we have the best condition for large walnut production, and it's called variety Inter. Also analyzing what's taking place in Italy and Georgia, we haven't seen the same type of large nuts. Another important factor governing or that's affecting production of nuts in Georgia is the state policy. As we know, there's a program for nut producers called Planning for the Future, Plant the Future. And in Ukraine, it's not as easy to begin as it is in Georgia. In terms of funding, in Georgia, there are many credit programs that help producers to create orchards. There's partial compensation for seedlings and nursery, and also there's some compensation of equipment costs. In Ukraine, nothing of the type exists, unfortunately. As for land use in Georgia is private. There's private property. But in Ukraine, unfortunately, only last year did the land market begin developing. Of course, the pandemic affected the situation, and of course, the current war has halted development in the agricultural land market for the nearest future. And this makes it difficult to create orchards. We have lands where annual crops are developed and grain crops, but Georgia doesn't have the same program for developing grains. And so we need to create conditions in Ukraine for perennial crop development. In Georgia, the situation is better with perennials. If we look at soil fertility, soil fertility is good in Ukraine for crops such as grains and corn, and producers aren't quite as interested in nut production because it may take 10 years for their investments to pay for themselves. In Georgia, the situation is slightly better, but considering what I've said already, not all lands are used for for horticulture. The main share of horticulture lands. There are risks related to horticulture orchards that affect the field as well, the sector as well. As for processing, in Ukraine, those who have created commercial orchards, as Gennady Yudin said, we have already 3 modern processing plants. We don't have this. We have good cooperation between producers and processors, which is an advantage that we have. And so new producers of nuts can count on these processors that already exist, and they can get bank funding, bank credits and loans for developing their own processing plants. So let's look at logistics now. Germany, France, and Belgium, and the Netherlands are the main logistic hubs for Ukraine, and there are some customs barriers, but generally logistics with the EU is fairly good. And so that's a comparative analysis between Georgia and Ukraine. As for climatic conditions, here on this map you can see the zones where favorable nut growing conditions. The yellow zone has the best climate conditions for nuts. The green area, the light green area, is best for, the green area is best for nut production because it has high soil fertility and high enough precipitation. The yellow zone has lower precipitation. The dark green area has some hazelnut production. And if we look at the nut production in western Ukraine, there is a high humidity in western Ukraine and fairly high fertility, and it's similar to Kakheti in terms of nut production capabilities. There's also irrigation in Kakheti, which makes it more similar to western Ukraine. The yellow Black Sea region is fairly favorable for nut production. The Ukrainian Nut Association has chosen particular varieties of walnuts, which are most favorable for organic nut production. Because these varieties are resistant to pests. They are very due to their structure, and considering that there are varieties that are resistant to disease and to pests, they can be grown and used for organic exports because they meet European market, European and American standards for for organic nuts, which are grown without pesticides. And so we're going to continue growing the market of organic nut production. So we don't have very many we don't have very many orchards that have organic standard certificates yet, and we need to work on this in the coming years. We see that the Yarivsky variety of walnut has high quality. Here's another variety of nut kernel. It has an amber color. It's organic, and it also deserves attention in terms of production and sales. In Ukraine, we have seedlings that have organic certificates from the very beginning of the creation of the orchard. Ukraine has companies which have received certificates for their bio remedies for improving soil quality, and they can be used in technologies of orchard creation, and they help to reduce pests and diseases. Here are the companies that have been and the products that have been used now for several years in walnut production, and in the future these will be used also in hazelnut production. Certification of organic orchards, of course, takes years. You cannot do this in a single year. And so we're in a kind of transition period, and there are three stages of certifying an orchard, and each stage takes 1 year or more. A classical organic orchard requires a particular type of mechanical equipment, because of course fighting pests cannot be done with pesticides, and so the orchards need to be weeded. You can obtain the certification for nut cores and for unshelled nuts. And it's important to make sure that nut producers fulfill all of the requirements in order to export their products to Europe. As for blanching, we don't have much Chandler walnuts, and so we have begun blanching walnuts. In Georgia, for example, hazelnuts are blanched traditionally, but in Ukraine this is a new line of work, a new field of work. As for final products, we have walnut oil, for example, and considering the number of oil producers in Ukraine, of which I've counted over 10, these are producers that produce both organic oil nuts, cold-pressed walnut oils, and in the future they plan to produce hazelnut oil. As for certificates, most of our exporters use the HCCP certificates standards. Ukraine has a number of nurseries that produce seedlings to create new orchards, and the varieties are used which have the right quality of nut cores and the right maturity qualities. And in our experience, we base our practices on the Moldovan experience, because Moldova traditionally was an orchard-based country which has the most experience in nut production. They were the first to begin producing nuts, and we have gained a lot from their experience. We have studied hazelnut production in Italy and Turkey, but we've learned the most from Georgia because there are long traditions and conditions that are closest to ours. And so we create plantations based on Georgian seedlings. This is an example of in vitro seedling production at our nurseries. We constantly support each other, and we have meetings with our Georgian colleagues to learn from their experience. And so the subject of my presentation was what we can learn from Georgia. We can learn from their hazelnut production and also walnuts, and how to use walnuts in the national cuisine, and also how to process nuts.
Now, according to our program, we have a coffee break where can we hopefully try some nut products on the left. But before, I would like to announce that after the coffee break, we will have cooperation agreement signing between Georgian Nuts, Walnuts and Almonds Association and Ukrainian colleagues. And we will go in depth into the sector of Georgian walnut, almond and hazelnut. So see you here in 15 minutes, like at 12:15. Thank you. Minda mogaksenotrom tchut metsuchi ak sheochte.
Please, let's reconvene in 15 minutes at 12:15, please.